Welcome to the CU 2.0 podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the CU 2.0 podcast with big new ideas about credit unions and conversations about innovative technology with credit union and fintech leaders. This podcast is brought to you by Quillo, the real-time loan syndication network for credit unions, and by your host, longtime credit union and financial technology journalist Robert McGarvey. And now, the CU 2.0 podcast with Robert McGarvey.
Careful or courageous? Which are you? James Grenon, Vice President of Administration at Summon Credit Union, a mid-sized institution in North Carolina, raised exactly that question in a recent CU Insight story entitled, Careful or Courageous? The Leadership Choice That Shapes Culture. Regular listeners know I have a bugaboo about what I see as the unhealthy risk aversion of many CU executives and boards. So you can guess I'm all in on Grenon's topic. In the article, Grenon sets the stage with a heavy snowfall in North Carolina. His young daughters hadn't ever seen so much snow. Initially, they were frightened and wanted to stay inside. In the piece, Grenon picked up the story, and I quote, "They bundled up anyway. Carefully at first, testing their footing, adjusting their pace. Before too long, there were snowball fights in the yard, sled runs down the hill, and laughter echoing through the neighborhood with other friends. They respected the conditions, but they did not let the conditions decide for them. That is the balance leadership requires. Acknowledge your risk, prepare for it, but do not let caution become confinement," close quote. In our conversation, we explore the cautious, courageous dynamic of credit unions involving everything from a core conversion, a recent project at Summit, to the rollout of AI initiatives. Meantime, fintechs embrace risk. They grow in part by taking risks, lots of risks. Nobody is saying credit unions should be as ready to plunge into risk, but should they take more risks? Listen up. So is it snowing in North Carolina?
Not now, currently. Thank goodness. We're back up in the 70s now, mid-70s. But, we got our fair share a few weeks ago, more than we've had in over a decade, probably.
Yeah, and that was the trigger or the metaphor that you used in that CU Insight piece. Now, your title, VP of Administration, you have a lot of action under that tent, right? What's in your portfolio?
I do, just like, in the credit union space and mid-sized credit union, we wear many hats. My primary responsibilities are overseeing our human resources, marketing, business development, and also our wealth management group.
They don't have a lot in common.
Well, interestingly enough, I tell people I have the best job. I get to work with, with business development and marketing. I get to work with all of the members and everything external. And then, of course, with HR, working with our internal staff. So, talent development, recruiting, et cetera. So interestingly enough, it actually goes together pretty well.
Now, how big is your credit union?
Summit is now approximately 347 million.
So the piece you wrote fascinated me because I've been saying for some years that the dirtiest four-letter word in a credit union executive's vocabulary is risk. It's a word that they hate to use, hate to hear, and certainly don't ever want to do it themselves. And your piece pretty much tracked that same belief of mine, that many credit unions are held back by a risk aversion, I would call it. And you look at fintechs, they're plowing ahead, getting all kinds of business because risk is just, they wake up in the morning saying, what's the biggest risk today? Great, I'm all for it. Bring it on. I'm not saying credit unions should be quite as reckless, if you will, but you see what I'm saying there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's kind of where, all this kind of came about. I've had the same, I've been in the credit union space now about 18 years. So worked at a couple of different ones, different asset sizes, but that's kind of what I was thinking about too when I wrote my article, interacted with my daughters, and it was pretty natural to think of it that way. As I was thinking about the article and the content here, it just kind of went hand in hand. And I think what really dawned on me was caution and courage. They're not opposites. They're partners. And it's just really how you prepare. There's nothing wrong with being cautious. I think that's what got the credit unions to where we are today, the stability, getting us through some of those economic challenges with the Great Recession and things of that nature. So that was good for us. But for us to look forward strategically, I think that's where we have to put courage out in front a little further.
Well, if you go back all the way in history, the first credit union was started by some French guys in New Hampshire whom the banks didn't want to bank because they mainly spoke French, among other reasons. So these were people being turned away by the banks. Go away. We don't want your business. So the history of credit unions actually does involve risk. So your credit union went through a core conversion, which I know from talking with enough C-suite credit union people, they'd much rather get root canal on every tooth in their mouth than do a core conversion. And that they view that as extremely high risk. So why did you do that core conversion?
You're absolutely right. Just speaking with other CEOs and other executives, it's not something to take lightly. As you're aware, the core conversion touches every single person inside and outside of the credit union. At Summit Credit Union, we did feel that it was time we had outgrown the technology and some services that our prior core provider either could not offer today, some flexibility for certain product types today, or what we were looking to do in the future. So we knew in order to remain competitive for our members, prospective members, we were going to have to look at some new technology that was going to allow us that additional flexibility. This was not a decision taken lightly at all. It was years in the making of discussions, looking at different core providers, what was a good fit for our membership, our product, our loan and deposit types, and where we wanted to go in the future to serve our members. I am sure Sam, our CEO, Sam Whitehurst, would have probably preferred, I don't want to put words in his mouth, would have probably preferred not to have done a core conversion, but it's something as a organization and leadership that we knew was necessary in order to be viable and around for our members. Last year, 2025, was our 90th anniversary here at Summit Credit Union, and we knew that we would not be around for the next 90 years if we still had the same technology and processes that we have today. That has worked well for the past 20 to 30 years. But as you know, as technology is so quickly adapting, and we felt that we had to do the same thing. And I think that's where the courageous came into play. We knew it was going to be a hard decision. It was going to be a heavy lift on everyone from our board of directors all the way down to the front line. And in order to ensure that it was a successful conversion, we had to embrace that. We told our staff, this is going to be hard, but we're right here with you. We're going to roll our sleeves up. We're going to learn this together. And we also shared with them, it's the importance of the transparency there's no such thing as over communicating, whether it's over communicating to your staff internally or your membership outside of the four walls of the credit union. So we kept communication open and learned together. Of course, there were frustrations and learning curves along the way. Nothing is perfect, but Now that we're on the other side of it, a little over 6 months past it, we know for sure we made the right decision for our credit union, for Summit Credit Union, and for our membership.
Did that empower the credit union to think about doing other risky things? And right now, every senior credit union executive has a bunch of risky things on his or her plate. Things like AI. Yeah, to what extent do we use AI is a really risky question in credit union land. So you successfully went through this, probably the biggest risk that a credit union can take, the core conversion. So do you feel like, hey, we're almost supermen?
I don't want to stroke our egos too much. Anytime there's change, right? There's an uncomfortable period that staff and members are both going to go through. We move this from point A to point B, but I go back to transparency and communication to make sure that we knew from the beginning where, from point A, where we wanted to end up at point Z. And we shared that path throughout the entire process so that our staff was aware and could embrace it and get on board. And then also with our members, as soon as we were at a stage that we could share what screenshots, what the new platform was going to look like on their end, new services that they were going to have either today. And again, part of a core conversion, it's not that all of these shiny bells and whistles are going to be available on day one. It's that decision done so that you can have the extra flexibility for better efficiencies, tomorrow or 5 or 10 years down the road. So, we wanted some short wins, but essentially it was to keep the communication open. And I'll tell you something interesting, Robert, is, we monitor our social media and our different review sites. And again, I said there's no such thing as over communicating, but we communicated to our membership through every possible channel, through emails, our social media, a dedicated landing page on our website, the TVs in our branch lobbies, you name it, statement messages, our quarterly newsletters. We wanted that front and center. We essentially treated it like it was a campaign, one of our typical campaigns that we put all efforts and energy into. And I think by doing that, the membership understood that we were doing it for them. We were doing it for the credit union, for the success of the credit union. And I can tell you that, speaking with our call center manager and working with marketing, that the number of complaints, like true complaints from members was essentially zero, which is just unheard of. So, I would say it was overall a success. Did it frustrate a few? Absolutely. It's just kind of the nature of the beast here. But overall, it was very successful, and I think that's because our entire organization went into this all in from a courageous standpoint.
Now, are there other things on the to-do list at Summit?
Absolutely, Robert. With the conversion or the system upgrade, that's really just not even the halfway point. Once you get to that finish line and you're live, you think we can take a deep breath and kind of just take a little breath, and we did. But this year will be an opportunity for us to, we look at it at every initiative impacts people, process, or technology, or a combination of all three. So we had our big technology upgrade in 2025, and now it's time to work on new processes and being able to equip our people, our staff that serve our members each day. So the big piece is the technology with the system upgrade, but that now changes workflows, different processes and hopefully some efficiency gains, which we have already seen in certain areas. So I would share with anybody, any organization that's thinking about a core conversion, don't think that the day you go live, it's over. It's really just the beginning, because you have to learn and become a subject matter expert of your new platform. We were on our previous system for close to 30 years. So you had employees that worked on the system for 20, 25 plus years, to some that were here just a couple weeks prior. So you had, deep subject matter experts to now on day one or during training, we're all kind of level set and all kind of starting at the same point. And you can't expect that the employee that has worked on that same system and seen it evolve over the years, the upgrades that took place, to have that same knowledge and comfort level that they had from 25 years of working. So again, that's working with our staff for training and support to help them become as efficient and effective as they were or even better than they were on a 25 year system. So that's really just the starting point to now work on different processes and looking at opportunities to add additional services for a membership.
Right. That's usually the trigger for core conversion, is that you want to do X, Y, and Z, but you can't really do it with the current core, or you can't do them very well. It's the same reason you buy a new personal computer, basically, or a new work computer. I want to run this program and I can't do it. So I'll get a new computer that lets me do it. Much less risk if I do that on my home computer than I'm doing it on a credit union core, but same basic idea. What are you doing with AI at Summit?
Well, that's the hot topic right now. I think with every consumer, every institution, and I think we've stuck our toes in and trying to learn more about it and some of the capabilities with it. It is very intriguing and moving so fast already. Just the last couple years that before somebody said AI or Chat GPT, that was not part of our vocabulary just a couple years ago. And in already such a short time frame, now we're talking the next step is agentic AI with the agents. So, we are looking at it and have already started incorporating it, some fashion of it in some of our software, and also looking at some future possibilities too with some other service providers. It's definitely not going anywhere, so it's time to embrace it.
Yeah, definitely. And as you say, this has happened so fast that 2 years ago, if you knew the word AI, you probably thought it meant machine learning, which it did. But now it means a whole lot more than that. And who even knew what an LLM was 2 years ago? I certainly didn't. A large language model? What? What's that? So it's a whole different world. But clearly, this is starting to transform credit unions really fast pace. And big ones are jumping into it. Smaller ones are looking around, trying to figure out where to really get moving.
With the core conversion and then looking at, our call center software and just looking at different ways to be more efficient. It's not all about trying to reduce headcount. Of course, your staff is your highest operating cost, but it's also that's what makes a credit union what it is the member service that we give, and that special customized approach. So it's not to try to limit that, but it's to be more effective and efficient. So if we can use AI in our call center through either chats or something of that nature in the call tree to be able to answer some of your more basic questions or even, medium complex questions very quickly and effectively, it better serves the member to let them kind of self-serve and then frees up more time for staff to work on some more complex situations with, some type of customized plan to structure a loan that meets their needs, or even on the consulting side with working with our financial planner.
Well, what's your field of membership?
So we started off serving the telephone industry with Bell South. So since then, I mentioned that we've been in business this is our 91st year, and kind of expanded from the telephone industry and now serve approximately 300 employer groups or SEGs all throughout North Carolina, primarily the Piedmont Triad. So it's a mix of, different industries. Kind of found a niche with, we have a lot of manufacturing companies, a couple of the major hospitals in the area, and so it's really just a mix across the board.
Now let's go back to what we were talking about in the beginning, which is caution versus courage in the credit union. When you talk with fellow executives at Summit, what's the reaction to that dichotomy? And you're not preaching recklessness, I know that, but you might be misinterpreted that you are.
It is a balancing act. They're not opposites. Caution and courageous have to be partners. So, to be cautious is very important, and would never tell anybody to not be cautious and to plan accordingly. But the courageous side is to take that leap of faith and to understand that everything doesn't have to be perfect. I think that's one thing we can actually learn from our cooperative competition with fintechs, is doing some smaller testing groups and making adjustments. And, it doesn't have to be perfect on day one. We can figure out how to do something and implement it. So, it's that balancing act of taking the proper steps, planning accordingly, but being courageous to not pause, because we're in the risk business. Everything we do, there is some type of risk associated with it. There's a risk of not implementing a new solution, which is not being viable, not being around in the next 5 to 10 years. So by doing nothing is dangerous in itself too. That's a risk in itself. So I think by, having a very strong strategic plan, business plan, and following that and having the board support is what we try to remind ourselves and stick to.
I think fintechs, and to some degree the biggest banks, I certainly don't know the number, and it varies from institution to institution, but they have some number in mind that, okay, 3% of the loans we make are going to go bad. I don't know which 3%, but some of them are. In fact, I know that from securitized mortgages. But before the big mortgage bust, before the idiot paper was issued, everybody knew that in this bucket of securitized mortgages, 3% or 5% were going to go bad. And you just accepted that. It's fine. Once you bought it, you said, but 95% will be good. Yep, that's true. We don't know which 95, but that's mathematically, that's pretty much what's going to happen. Whereas the credit unions often want to get they want to take the risk down to zero, which is probably impossible, actually. There's always going to be risk in every loan that you do. Even if you give a loan to Warren Buffett, there's a risk involved. It's admittedly minuscule.
Absolutely. And that's my point. There's a risk in everything you do as a consumer or running a financial institution, a credit union. And You can't, I don't think there's a such thing as completely mitigating risk or having risk down to zero. One thing I think that we can learn from fintechs to not, they do move fast. And I think moving too fast, you can break things along the way. And credit unions cannot operate that way.
No,
We
your regulator would go crazy
absolutely.
with some justification.
And
Um,
absolutely, it's reckless. You have to be here to be sustainable here for your membership, and not being reckless. I think we can learn from them to shorten learning cycles, and they do well at experimentation. So you can test small and learn quickly, and try to adjust to the broader membership.
well, I see that all the time with technology companies. I've been a Google user for 25 years, an Amazon user for almost as long. So I'm often invited in these little pilot groups. It's and oftentimes the pilot fails. I mean, it's but if you're in that group, you understand it might fail. So you don't, at least in my case, it's a learning experience for the company and also for me. So
It
that's
certainly is.
and
There's small launches like that. It does allow movement without sacrificing stability. It's disciplined experimentation, but just not doing it too recklessly.
well, it's like I'm not a gambler personally, but I have friends who'll go to Las Vegas and they'll tell me, well, I'm prepared to lose $1,000 this weekend, but not a penny more. And and I think that's smart. It's the people who get in trouble are the people who have lost 1,000. So, well, I'm going to double down so I get my money back. And by the end of the weekend, they're down 10,000. No, okay, now we got a problem. So if you know what your risk is and you say, okay, I can handle that. And the credit union can handle risk too. It can handle a certain amount of it, as very few credit unions actually went down during the mortgage meltdown, et cetera, of 2008, et cetera. So,
Yeah, certainly that calculated risk will definitely pays off for sure.
so I would just like to see more of that courage in the board. Well, boards are often extremely uncourageous. It's not asking you to comment on whether yours is or isn't, but I often hear from credit union executives that it's the board that won't let us do this. And true, false. Maybe if I ask the board, they say no, they don't want to do it.
Yeah, from a board standpoint, I would think, part of it is we have an amazing board here at Summit. They do have a fiduciary responsibility to the membership and to the credit union. So, part of that is by governance. So, it is kind of, cautious by design. But I think, we go back to talking about, they're not opposites in how caution and being courageous work together as partners. And our board has embraced that. So, you have to wear both hats. But you're absolutely right. I think, it's the nature of credit union governance and how they have the fiduciary responsibility to the membership. But, it's taking a calculated risk too to make sure that that particular credit union is going to be around to serve the current membership or more.
Yeah, there really aren't that many credit union failures. And perhaps then again, if it's an NCUA insured institution, the members have no damage in that. But yeah, I'm not preaching that the bank failure, credit union failure is a good thing. I just would like to see a lot more risk taking on the part of the credit unions.
Yeah, it's a good point. And if you look back at our history in the credit union industry and just looking at the shrinking of the different of credit unions over the last several years, and was it necessary? Did it have to happen? I think when I looked at it last, the NCUA records, there was approximately 4,400 credit unions in 2025 or the first part of this year, and just 5 years ago, there were around 5,500 credit unions, and just go back 10 years ago, it was upwards to 6,000. So, with those consolidations and mergers and acquisitions, why, was that because of not being courageous? I would have to say that some of them was, just having such a drastic decrease. And I think to be viable and to be able to serve your current membership base, then it is time to be courageous and look for ways to serve your members.
Yeah, and look at what the fintechs are doing, for instance, and not try to imitate them, but see what you can learn from them that your members might appreciate. Introducing new products. Credit unions hate risk, but risk is part of financial services.
It is, and more so over the last few years. I think we were, by nature, we're kind of risk averse, but, things have shifted drastically we talked about AI, with the advance of technology so rapidly. The technology is, from a consumer standpoint, I think the expectations of a consumer are greater, more so today than ever. Competition's more aggressive, and, to make sure that you can serve your membership, it's time to step out and be courageous.
That doesn't mean that you look out of your window in your North Carolina house and see a foot of snow and saying, geez, I'm going to go get in my car and see if I can take the nearest corner at 100 miles an hour. That would be stupid. Now, if you go out and say, maybe I'm going to make a snowman. I've seen that. That might be fun on the front lawn. You'll probably be safe doing that. Worst case, you'd slip and fall in some snow. It's not that big a deal.
You're absolutely right. Like I said I mentioned in my article, and I have 2 young daughters, and I will never tell them to not be careful. But, and especially when the roads are icy and speaking with your colleagues, but you can't just sit inside and wait for better weather. You got to prepare and plan and look forward. And same thing with credit unions. Your credit unions were built on trust, and it's time we got to pair that trust with disciplined courage.
And we do, if you make a good point. It's fairly common when you've talked with someone for a few minutes, you're about to leave, and you say, take care. I've never in my life say, take risks. I've never said that. Well, I'm thinking I might practice doing that, because sometimes I do say, take care. So why don't I try the opposite? Take risks, man. Yeah, they might look at me funny.
I think it's a good approach to take. I think, it's just the being cautious or careful is there. You don't want to take that too lightly. But, instead of just always saying, be careful, I think that's an opportunity for all of us in the industry to support one another and lift the whole movement up and remind each other of why being courageous is equally or more important.
Before we go, think hard about how you can help support this podcast so we can do more interviews with more thoughtful leaders in the credit union world. What we're trying to figure out here in these podcasts is what's next for credit unions. What can they do to really, really, really make a difference in the financial scene? Can't all be mega banks, can it? It's my hope it won't all be mega banks. It'll always be a place for credit unions. That's what we're discussing here. So figure out how you can help. Get in touch with me. This is rjmcgarvey@gmail.com. Robert McGarvey again. That's rjmcgarvey@gmail.com. Get in touch. We'll figure out a way that you can help. We need your support. We want your support. We thank you for your support. The CU 2.0 podcast.